this.
If I do, and I'm damned if I don't, and I'm damned if I do, and I'm damned if I don't. Without you, you told the sharpest kiss on the cover of my skin. Kiss me so. It goes something like this.
In a world first, France has become the first nation in history to guarantee the right to an abortion into its constitution. The decision made by French lawmakers came on the 4th of March and officially sealed with wax on the 8th, which just so happened to be International Women's Day. The passing of the amendment was in direct response to the United States and its decision to appeal Roe v. Wade in June of 2022. Roe v. Wade, for those who might have forgotten, was a landmark decision made back in 1973 in which the United States Supreme Court ruled that the right to abortion were generally covered by the US Constitution. As of the 2022 ruling, however, abortion rights within the US now vary heavily state to state, ranging from legal at any stage to illegal unless specific requirements are met. French and other international lawmakers praise France for their history-defining support towards women's rights and reproductive freedoms, with the French President Emmanuel Macron stating that France will not rest until sweeping changes and protections to these rights occur all across Europe. The French president also went on to detail how he would personally advocate for these same reproductive rights to be included in the European Union's Charter of Fundamental Rights, saying, quote, "We're going to lead this fight in our continent, in our Europe, where reactionary forces are attacking women's rights." He would then go on to say, "We now have irrefutable proof that no democracy, not even the largest of them all, is immune." The president's not-so-subtle reference to the United States makes more sense in the context of the two nations. With their systems of government being so similar, many within France have been worried that the right to an abortion may not have been as protected as they had once assumed. Unlike the United States, however, abortion within France generally isn't seen as a contentious issue within the country. The vote itself passed with an overwhelming vote of 780 to 72, and many of its critics were only against the measure because they thought it was entirely unnecessary. Abortions within France have been legal since 1975, with some lawmakers arguing that abortion has been constitutionally protected in France as early as 2001. Either way, this amendment, whether it truly changes the status quo within the country or not, is a landmark step forward to maintaining and upholding reproductive rights on the international stage. The amendment marks the first passed into French law since 2008, and the 25th since the start of the Fifth French Republic in 1958. It's unclear whether nations will decide to follow in France's footsteps, but decisions like this tend to ripple quickly within Europe, so viewers probably shouldn't be surprised if this becomes more common. The Caribbean nation of Haiti has spiraled even further into chaos this month, as Prime Minister Ariel Henry announced that he would be stepping down once a provisional council can be formed to choose a successor. Mr. Henry's departure was directly attributed to the rising gang coalitions, which have grown staggeringly powerful within Haiti. Groups who many would argue have de facto control over the country. To understand how the fuck this could even happen, we need to look at the bigger picture. In terms of being a country, Haiti has been through some serious shit throughout its history, starting as a slave colony, later being attacked by Napoleon's France, occupied by the United States, ruled by a father-son dictatorship for 3 decades, suffering its 2010 earthquake, and going through 4 coups in the last 35 years. As recent as 2021, the former president Jovenel Moïse was assassinated by a bunch of Colombian mercenaries who were hired through the Miami-based security company CTU Security. All of these former events have slowly eroded the Haitian government, spurred corruption, crippled its economy, and allowed gangs to thrive and take so much control. Ariel Henry's resignation was spurred by his recent visit to Kenya, a trip where he would seek support for a UN-backed operation to help quell the gangs. As retaliation, a wave of violence broke out across the country, with gang leader Jimmy Cherizier, better known as Barbecue, releasing a video stating that he intended to stop the operation. It's worth mentioning that even as of a year ago, officials speculated that around 90% of the capital of Port-au-Prince was controlled by gangs. And boy, were they a bunch of completionist motherfuckers. motherfuckers. On the 2nd and 3rd of March, armed gangs stormed two of the largest prisons in Haiti, freeing more than 4,700 people, many of whom went on to join their liberators. For context, only around 9,000 police were operating within Haiti at the time, which, as you might imagine, leaves them very much outmanned and outgunned. On the 4th, armed gangs were going to attack the heavily fortified Toussaint Louverture International Airport, and 2 days later, a police station would be burned down. The 8th of March would later see their Interior Ministry burned to the ground, along with another 2 police stations. On the 12th of March, Ariel Henry would officially turn in his resignation, and on the 13th, the President of Kenya announced that its mission to Haiti would be postponed for the time being. Since Ariel Henry's resignation, a council to select a new leader is taking shape from several political parties within Haiti, as well as a few members of the private sector. With this in mind, a research associate at the Washington-based Center for Economic and Policy Research said that the process to form this council was, quote, deeply flawed. He would then go on to note that gangs within Haiti could not simply be stopped by force alone, as this doesn't deal with the root causes of why the gangs became so powerful in the first place. Barbecue himself would go on to hold an impromptu news conference, which is apparently a thing that gangs do in Haiti, in which he openly rejected any solution which was led and supported by the international community. In his own words, it's the Haitian people who are going to take destiny into their own hands. Haitian people will choose who will govern them. University of Virginia Haitian politics expert Robert Fatton would give his own take on the situation, stating, quote, the reality is that you need to talk to the gangs. If they have that supremacy, and there is no countervailing force, it is no longer a question of if you want them at the table. They may just take the table. Whether the Haitian government is completely taken over by gangs, a peace deal can be struck, or an all-out civil war is declared, we'll be sure to follow up in the later months if the situation changes. Long-time viewers will remember our story of a door plug blowing off a Boeing 737 in early January of this year. As it turns out, this would only be the beginning of a few bad months for the company. Only this year, incidents involving Boeing planes include a cracked windshield, 2 engine fires, a nose wheel falling off, a stuck rudder pedal, a broken main landing gear, a 747 completely skidding off the runway, a missing skin panel, a fuel leak, and an in-air dive that injured 50 people. While most of these incidents were attributed to bad maintenance or just a random occurrence, there is absolutely blame to be assigned to Boeing and their well-documented recent quality struggles. There is also the suspicious death of the Boeing quality whistleblower John Barnett, who was found dead in his truck by apparent suicide right before he was about to give another round of testimony. At the tail end of March, Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun announced that he would step down from the company at the end of 2024, while a number of other key positions have also changed as a part of a restructure. In the meantime, Boeing planes remain flying and are still approved by all aviation authorities in the world. The American FAA has given Boeing a deadline to prove that they can fix their safety issues or face even stricter oversight, while the European EASA is reassured in Boeing's steps to address quality concerns. It's worth noting that according to aviation experts, the incidents reported within Boeing this year occur much more regularly than people might realize, but are simply not interesting enough to be reported on by the media. While not acceptable from a safety standpoint, there has not been an uptick in airline incidents so far this year, and all the incidents we mentioned ended without serious injury. As the old saying goes, flying is still the safest way to travel, and you're much more likely to die in a car on the way to testifying against an aviation company than to be involved in a plane crash. Speaking of companies which have safety as their highest priority, today's video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. If you still don't know about Surfshark after we've explained it every single month for like 5 years, then let me break it down for you, Mark. Surfshark is a groovy piece of software which allows you to appear anywhere in the world with the push of a button. This means that you could be chilling in Myanmar while virtually appearing in Manchester. The most obvious benefit to doing this is to escape the clutches of an oppressive regime. But if you also want to get to watch The Crown on Netflix, no DVD box set required. Along with getting to watch region-locked content, Surfshark also acts as your digital wingman when you're browsing the web, shielding you from ads, trackers, and malware, meaning you can continue to watch fan-made videos of mercy in peace. But the good news doesn't stop there, because by using the code on screen, viewers can score themselves an extra 3 months for free when they use the link in the description. To make things even easier, here's a QR code which already has the promotion applied. A little present to you to show how much we care. The best part of all is that if you change your mind anytime in the first 30 days, Surfshark will straight up give you a full refund for any reason at all. You could say you don't like their font, and these guys will still give you your money back with a big cheesy smile. It's legit legitimately that easy. Surfshark VPN. Killing ads, not whistleblowers. Meanwhile, the CEO of Kellogg's suggests that people should eat cereal for dinner. The governor of Utah signs a bill encouraging teachers to be strapped, and Saudi Arabia is appointed chair of the UN's Women's Rights Forum. The war between Israel and Hamas is still pushing on, and although the conflict has turned down to a quiet simmer, the civilians within Gaza are very much feeling the heat. The humanitarian situation within Gaza has not improved, with Gaza's Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, sitting at Phase 3 for the entire region, which is considered to be crisis levels. With this in mind, 25% of the population are already in Phase 5, the highest rating, which is considered to be catastrophic. To be at this level, people have to be dying every day, and a sizable portion of the population needs to be suffering from acute malnutrition. There have also been challenges to supply the region with humanitarian aid, because to state the obvious, it's still an active war zone. More shells and munitions were dropped into Gaza in the first 3 months of the war than were dropped by the United States in Iraq between 2004 and 2010. And as a reminder, the United States took over the whole damn country. From the Israeli perspective, aid into Gaza also risks providing supplies to Hamas, who, as the de facto government power, could simply confiscate any aid for themselves. As you might also predict, sending aid trucks deep into urban areas can also be challenging from a security standpoint, as countless civilians try to get supplies from armed soldiers in a place they're not exactly welcome. This is what happened on the 29th of February, when aid trucks escorted by IDF tanks were reportedly rushed by a crowd seeking supplies. IDF forces would initially fire warning shots to disperse the crowd, but would open fire as people started taking food out of a truck. At the end of the exchange, as many as 118 civilians were killed and another 760 were injured, in what is now being called the Flower Massacre. Getting accurate information for this incident remains pretty difficult, because although we know that Israeli troops killed a bunch of civilians, other details are still contested. Israeli officials announced that fewer than 10 casualties can be directly attributed to Israeli fire, with the rest being from the ensuing stampede. The IDF would also release a video of drone footage of the incident, although this was criticized by both the New York Times and the BBC for being cut up into different sections. One survivor of the event claimed that they were being ambushed by Israeli forces and shot by tanks, attack drones, and naval forces. At least at the time of writing, it's hard to know many of the exact details, as the event is still being investigated. More reputable news outlets have yet to cover it at all, and both Hamas and Israel have every reason to push an alternative sequence of events. Like so many incidents within this hell on earth, we just don't know. Israel's closest ally did its best to deliver aid to the region this month, when on the 5th of March, the United States, with the assistance of Jordan, began airdropping supplies directly into Gaza. Although obviously welcome, the effort would be dampened after one of the supply pallets would go on to kill 5 people, after its parachute failed to deploy. Officials from both the United States and Jordan would deny any involvement in the casualties. Airdrops are currently just a band-aid solution, however, as the United States plans to set up a floating pier at sea, which would then allow ships to deliver aid directly into Gaza. The logistical challenge involves setting up nearly 550 meters of causeway and pier, coordinating cargo ships to transfer supplies onto smaller support vessels, and then somehow distributing it to people who like the United States about as much as they like Israel. As having US soldiers on the ground could be seen as a politically unpopular move by pretty much everyone, much of the distribution will be handled by Fogbow, which was set up by former US intelligence and military officials. Swag couldn't find all that much about Fogbow, as its entire website is 2 pages. We don't know if it's a company, a non-profit, or if US troops are going to be wearing Fogbow t-shirts to get around their no boots on the ground policy. Like most things that happen within this godforsaken place, we just don't know. In any case, the United States plans to deliver as many as 2 million meals a day to those within Gaza, which will hopefully decrease the rate of severe starvation within the region. As always, here are the latest casualty figures as of time of editing. Viewers may remember the 2021 storming of the US Capitol, where supporters of the US President Donald Trump made their way into the Capitol building and dressed up like Vikings. We're not going to be talking about this incident today, but rather its sequel in Brazil 2 years later. In what was basically a rehash of the original, a crowd of supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro would invade a bunch of government buildings in the Capitol following his election loss. A bunch of people were injured and arrested, with many of those involved stating that their intention was to spur military leaders into overthrowing overthrowing the government. The story picks up again just over a year after the incident, when in February this year, 2 of Bolsonaro's aides were arrested on suspicion of planning a coup. Shortly after these arrests, former President Bolsonaro would spend 2 nights in the Hungarian embassy, saying he wanted to keep in touch with the authorities of a friendly country, and that other interpretations are a work of fiction with no connection to the reality of the facts. It's been speculated that Bolsonaro was attempting to gain sympathies of the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a man who shares similar hard-right views. Bolsonaro's fears of being arrested were likely spurred by the 10-year sentence of former Bolivian President Janine Áñez, who was found guilty of orchestrating a coup in 2022. Much like the case of Donald Trump, it's been hard for the court systems to figure out whether Bolsonaro was legitimately attempting to overthrow the government or just talking a load of shit. This month, however, Brazil's Supreme Court released documents stating that both the nation's army commander and air force commander were presented with a plan to stage a coup. Following this testimony, Mr. Bolsonaro would willingly surrender his passport until a further investigation could be conducted. On a completely unrelated note, Bolsonaro has also been facing accusations of fraud for faking his vaccination against COVID-19 when he previously visited the United States. Mr. Bolsonaro quite famously said a treasure trove of stupid shit during the pandemic, once stating that it wasn't his problem if vaccine side effects turned people into crocodiles. There is also his statement following 163,000 Brazilian deaths, where he would say, quote, "I'm sorry for the dead. I'm sorry. We're all going to die one day. Everyone here will die. There's no point in running away from it, running away from reality. You need to stop being a country of queers." Needless to say, Bolsonaro is way too entertaining for us to not follow this up wherever it leads. So stay tuned for more in the coming months. The Economist Intelligence Unit's yearly Democracy Index has been released, ranking 167 nations around the globe on 5 different democratic metrics. These include the electoral process, the functioning of government, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. To start with the bad news, the worldwide 2023 score was the lowest since the index was started in 2006, confirming what many had suspected is a regressive trend worldwide. The most democratic region worldwide changed hands to Western Europe this year, taking the title away from North America for the very first time. What's even more impressive is that Western Europe pulled that off, still chained to Turkey, which has seen its score slowly decline ever since they started measuring it. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the worst performing regions were the Middle East and Africa, with Mauritius being the only nation from both to qualify as a full democracy. In terms of individual nations, the top spot was unsurprisingly taken by Norway, which has maintained its place as the most democratic nation for over a decade. Nations from Northern Europe once again make up the majority of the top 10 countries, although notable exceptions include New Zealand coming in at number 2, Ireland taking 7th place, and Taiwan taking 10th place. To go over a few individual countries based on where the majority of our own viewers are, Canada managed to snag 13th place despite a regression, while Australia is down to 14th place, even when its score has slowly declined since 2019. Germany and the UK are at 12th and 18th place respectively, with neither moving even a fraction of a point from the previous year. We then come to the United States, which we're sorry to say has not seen enough of an improvement to be classified as a full democracy. The United States has held the classification of a flawed democracy since 2016, and has not seen a single year-on-year improvement ever since. 3 of the 5 metrics for the United States are actually quite high. However, they've historically been let down by both its political culture and its functioning of government. In 2022, for example, the US scored lower than Botswana and South Africa for its functioning of government score, and lower than Uganda, Zambia, and Hong Kong for its political culture metric. In terms of the absolute least democratic nations, it's no surprise that Afghanistan sits at the very bottom, followed closely by Myanmar, then North Korea in 3rd place. What's particularly exceptional about Afghanistan, however, is that in no point in the last 17 years has a nation been less democratic than it is right now. It might even be longer, but that's just when they started keeping count. To put it into perspective, North Korea's score is literally 4 times higher. The concerning trend from the last year sees an overall decline in democracy in nearly all corners of the globe. Perhaps more worryingly, nearly all gains were seen from some of the highest scoring nations anyway, meaning there's an unfortunate trend of a widening gap between nations who have tirelessly maintained their democratic systems and those who have seen it decline. As it currently stands, only 7.8% of the world's population currently live in a full democracy. 2024 is a year of elections for the world, a process where people can collectively exercise their right to choose who runs their country. This is not the case for Russia, however, as just like the shitty predictive text on your phone, any vote cast would be auto-corrected to this genocidal duck. Following a constitutional amendment enabling him to serve another 2 terms, Vladimir Putin laid the foundation to be in charge until 2030, which would make him Russia's longest-serving leader since Joseph Stalin. Putin's main opposition to this election was Nikolai Kharitonov, a 75-year-old from the Russian Communist Party and a representative from Russia's lower house. The other competitor was Leonid Slutsky, a person who we swear to God we didn't make up. Mr. Slutsky is the nominee for the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, which although might sound a bit softer in their policies, are actually a party of ultra-nationalists. Vladimir Zhirinovsky, the founder of the party, previously stated that he would want Russia to be ruled by a monarch with the title of Supreme Leader, and promised that he would shoot his political opponents if elected president. Lastly, there was Vladislav Davankov, a man representing the New People Party. The party's policies are pretty much what it says on the tin, not really changing how the country is run, but just running it with new people in charge. As you could probably tell, even if Putin decided to let another person win, it's not likely much would even change for the average Russian. To the surprise of absolutely fucking no one, Vladimir Putin would win the pretend election with 87.3% of the vote, with the next closest being Nikolai Kharitonov at 4.3%. Despite the election having a predictable outcome, it was nevertheless marred by dissent, suppression, fraud, and violence. An understandable criticism of the election was the lack of any real opposition, as anyone with teeth either ends up in jail, exile, or clumsily falling out a window. Most prominent of these was Alexei Navalny, who died in an Arctic penal colony in the middle of February. Whether through poisoning the guy or through sheer neglect, it's hard to argue that Putin didn't have Navalny killed. A sad reminder of the state of democracy within Russia. Navalny's widow, Yulia Navalny, has encouraged those unhappy with Putin's rule to turn out collectively and protest across the nation in a Noon Against Putin protest. Satellite demonstrations also sprung up at Russian embassies across the world. Not content with just demonstrating, some disgruntled citizens took more drastic measures, such as pouring bottles of dye into ballot boxes and setting fire to polling stations. Elections were also held in occupied areas of Ukraine, where turnout was over 80%. Such high voter turnout might be explained by videos of armed soldiers going door to door to collect votes. In some cases, physically entering houses to watch residents fill out ballots. It should go without saying, but if people are voting at gunpoint, it kinda defeats the purpose. Although Russia's election was straight up a sham, Ukraine had a whole different set of challenges for upholding its own democracy. Ukraine was scheduled to host its own elections this month, but since the start of the Russian invasion, the nation has been under martial law, drastically complicating the process. Although martial law doesn't prevent an election from going forward in times of emergency, the Ukrainian government determined that as certain freedoms could not be guaranteed during the election process, it would not make the results of such an election valid anyway. Although obviously a hard blow to democratic Ukraine, the threat of Russian troops shelling polling stations, preventing citizens from moving around, or trying to interfere with the election as a whole makes an election during wartime a very risky proposition. For the time being, Volodymyr Zelensky will remain as president until elections can be held in a free and fair manner. However, there's no telling how long this might take. According to a poll conducted in December of last year, Ukrainian trust in Zelensky sits at around 62%, which although high, is still quite a bit lower than the 84% he saw at the end of 2022. When we were able to talk to Ukrainian troops within the anti-air regiment, their biggest criticism of Zelensky was his inability to tackle corruption during his time in office. Zelensky quite famously campaigned as an anti-corruption candidate before his time in office. And although Ukraine has made good progress according to Transparency International, it still has a long way to go to weed out corruption within the nation. Despite this, trust in Ukrainian military still sits at an incredibly strong 96%. He is hoping that the invasion of Ukraine can finally come to a close, and that both Ukraine and Russia can eventually have elections that both nations deserve. To start yet another month of coverage for Ukraine, we have to praise Russian President Vladimir Putin for once again pulling off the impossible, convincing Sweden to join NATO. On the 7th of March, and after a 2-year-long process, Sweden officially becomes a full member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a 32-member security pact which once operated as a check against the Soviet Union. The process to join NATO was made longer by the opposition from both Turkey and Hungary. Turkey was pissed off after Sweden failed to stop a Quran from being burned, and an effigy of Turkish President Erdogan being hanged upside down, something Sweden defended as part of its free speech laws. Hungary, on the other hand, was still mad from when Sweden criticized the nation for being corrupt. However, to be fair to Sweden, Hungary is the most corrupt nation in Europe according to Transparency International, so it's not as if they just started talking shit. In any case, Sweden's ascension into NATO gives it a tangible bubble of protection from an expansionist Russia, as Article 5 states that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all NATO members. This means that if bombs were to start being dropped on Sweden, most of Europe and all of North America would immediately be at war with the aggressor. A big part as to why Russia started its invasion of Ukraine in the first place is because Ukraine had been eyeing up NATO membership. Had it been accepted, Russia would be facing the most powerful military force in history should it try to invade. With this in mind, even if nations aren't about to send their own troops into Ukraine, nothing is stopping them from donating weapons from their stockpiles. The large US aid package to Ukraine we mentioned last month is still stuck in limbo within US Congress. However, a much smaller $300 million package was sent in the meantime. With this in mind, experts predict that this smaller package will only last a few weeks. In a break from tradition, the United States was quite handedly outspent by its European allies this month. France committed €3 billion this year alone. Denmark donated €336 million in artillery systems. Germany promised €500 million, and the European Council announced another €5 billion worth of military aid. Despite these packages, Ukraine is still going through some shit on the ground, with a strike in Odessa killing 20 and wounding another 70, and targeted attacks hitting major energy facilities all throughout the month. Blasts were even heard by Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis upon his visit to Odessa on the 6th of March, providing a grim reminder to the daily conditions for those still living within the country. On the 2nd of March, we were actually sent footage of a drone strike in Odessa by a medic from Doctors Without Borders. Here's some of the raw footage from the incident, which is as bizarre as it is frightening.
Это дроны. Ай-яй-яй. Че эксплозия завода. Fire they couple, man.
It wasn't all bad for the blue and yellow flag, however, as on the 12th of March, Ukraine successfully launched dozens of drones and rockets targeting vital Russian energy facilities throughout the country. The most damaging of these strikes came from 2 drones in particular, with one striking an oil refinery in the region of Nizhny Novgorod, with another hitting an oil depot within the city of Oryol. Both strikes caused further damage to its domestic oil production, a commodity which has suffered recent shortages within the nation. On the same day, on the 12th, a Russian military plane filled with 8 crew members and 7 other passengers crashed into the Ivanovo region inside Russia. Russian news agencies reported that the crash was due to an engine fire and not the result of direct military involvement. But as Russian news agencies talk a lot of shit, your guess is as good as ours. The people in that aircraft weren't the only Russians who were both flaming and in serious danger, however, as the nation would add the LGBTQ+ movement to its list of government-recognized terrorists. Those of you who are at home, who are as straight as the average banana, can now feel a sense of pride, as the Russian government now considers you just as dangerous as the group who shot up a Moscow concert hall and killed over 130 people this month. Speaking of a long-held disdain for homosexuals, the Catholic Church would weigh in on the Ukraine conflict this month, with Pope Francis stating that Ukrainian leadership should, quote, have the courage of the white flag. Ukraine would offer an official reply stating, quote, our flag is a yellow and blue one. This is the flag by which we live, die, and prevail. We shall never raise any other flags. Poland's foreign minister Radoslaw Sikorski would also chime in, saying, quote, how about, for balance, encouraging Putin to have the courage to withdraw his armies from Ukraine? At the time of writing, Ukraine claims that Russia could be gathering 100,000 soldiers for a potential counteroffensive coming in the summer. Ukrainian Ground Forces commander Oleksandr Pavlyuk stated on the 22nd of March that Russian plans were unknown at this time, but the data shows that they are creating groups to this magnitude, and that Ukraine is preparing accordingly. We are currently unable to say when such an offensive will start, and even more clueless to guess when it might end. But rest assured, we'll be here to cover it for as long as it might take. Although this month's news has come to a close, this doesn't mean the party has to stop. If you haven't checked it out already, Swag Academy is our second channel for all the things that might be too stupid to revoke our long list of Pulitzer Prizes. Here's a sneak peek at our latest video.
Just to go back to a previous question, did we establish they are born in the United States?
Yep.
Okay, so the US-based person of color, musician, who was massive in 2016 and has fallen off massively since then. Jason Derulo.
On top of this, we sure as hell can't finish off an episode of the news without thanking our Patreon supporters, without which Swag would probably have to give up on the news and make top 10 Fortnite videos. The truth is that this series is hard, slow, expensive, and makes less ad revenue than it takes for me to say this sentence. The way we see it is that if you guys are paying to keep the lights on, our only obligation is to do the best to meet your standards. With this in mind, our level of bias admittedly spikes when people ask us about which VPN is the best, but other than that, we try to stay as grounded as possible. If you want to help us out, watch some exclusive content, or just have your name in the end credits, a link to support us will be down below. With that out of the way, on behalf of the entire news team, we'd like to wish everyone a very happy April.
I'm still parked out by the lake, 80 miles from Santa Fe. And I'm sitting out here parked out by the lake. If you're wondering where I'm parked, yeah, I'm out parked by the lake, the one that's 80 miles from Santa Fe. And I'm parked out by the lake, 80 miles from Santa Fe. It's the lake that's parked where I'm at by the lake. And this lake is where I'm parked, 80 miles from Santa Fe. And I'm still parked out here by this lake, 80 miles from Santa